Unless you wanna bet that I can get you back inside your head before the summer ends and spread a little love. Just for a little fun, I'll make you come back to me before the rise of every sun. Baby, it's meant to be, I know you got a man, but he don't understand. You're gonna be a heartbreaker. You're such a love taker. So just suck me in and you can toss me like a cigarette. 'Cause I just wanna be a bad habit, yeah.
Welcome to Inside the Numbers with the People's Pundit. And now here's your host, Rich Barris.
All right. Welcome to Inside the Numbers with the People's Pundit. I'm your host, Rich Barris, the People's Pundit. 6 days less out from Election Day. All right, before we get into, I'm going to share a couple articles. There's some new polling I want to talk about, only for the fact that it goes with the general theme of what I'm trying to convey today. And that is the difference between what national polling can see and state level and district level, and why one is so much easier than the others, and what historically has happened when we see this disparity. All right. And I think that's a good way to put it. All right. So before we get into it, though, don't forget, follow me on Truth and Getter, at People's Pundit, on Twitter, at People's_Pundit. But the best place to follow me is right there, peoplespundit.locals.com. And for all of the new members and supporters that we got, welcome to the community. It's the best community, I think. I'm biased on the social internet. All right, look, things are not looking good for Democrats. They're not at all. All right, so we're going to go over generic ballot polling, and we're going to take a little trip down memory lane. All right. There is, of course, one generic ballot out today that is Democrat +5. And it is routinely the worst one of, if not the worst, polls every cycle. When they started to dip into battleground states, they had even worse error rates. And this is a registered voter sample, but that's not what's going on. That's not the difference here. And I think that some of these people that are only online are in for a rude awakening, because there is a major disparity between multiple different modes in the phone collection, multiple different methods in phone collection mode, and the online survey panels, which during midterms really can screw you up badly. They're handy to reach some younger people that don't want to answer the phone, that even don't want to reply to a text. They can be handy with that, but when it comes to being flooded with professional classes, and unfortunately, you won't even see that unless you're looking at their occupation, which most pollsters don't even know, all right? Unless you're digging into the panel. Sometimes panels will provide some of that information for you, but it's not very good. And the bottom line is, even education can look very misleading. And you'll only know you have a problem when you look at your phone collection or you look at other claims. Compare it during midterms, especially. The online panel mode is a problem for state level polling and for district level polling. We've always, even since we began to incorporate online polling in 2016, it was almost entirely the national poll and the battleground polls an online panel. But we designed that online panel from a voter file. All right, so it was people who responded to us that we contacted on the voter file and said, listen, we're conducting a tracking poll this presidential election year. Would you participate in this tracking poll over the duration of the election cycle? And we, kept building up yeses, phone numbers for them, emails for them, put them on the yes list, and we would repeatedly contact them. All right, so most times 25 to 33% of the panel was repeat interviews, because the point of it was to show that media polling, university polling is subjected really to very bad response bias. All right. So with that in mind, it's not what's going on here with that poll being registered voter versus likely voter. Our registered voter generic ballot is Republican +2. The likely voter is Republican +5. That's not the difference. The NBC News poll or the Wall Street Journal poll that came out yesterday, that had Republican +2. That was registered voter. One of the ones we're going to go over in a minute here after the CNN. is a registered voter, and that's Republican +2. This 7-point disparity, I really believe from this pollster is an ethical issue. I really do, because there's enough evidence after their very terrible performance over the last few cycles. There's plenty of evidence that they were doing something wrong and they needed to change course correct. They did not. So there's only one reason why a pollster doesn't do that, folks. They're in the can. And I told you it would be no mercy after this election. No mercy with these people. Because you will find, everyone's going to find, that we're going to have some people on our side that have not been on our side all of these years. It's going to be a little bit more of a united front against these people. And not that we won't share and look at their data. It's just that they will be slapped with a big old caveat, you suck. All right. Let's take a look at the CNN poll. And why, I'm going over this to lay the groundwork for what I want to explain to you, which is that, maybe Anselm College, they had Boldak up by 1 in New Hampshire. That maybe they caught some of this shift, but this shift is so big in every national poll, it cannot be ignored. And what typically happens is that national polls lead the states. The movement that you find nationally is a leading indicator of the states, which are harder to poll because the states have a smaller population and it depends on their diversity. If they're very diverse, right? In a state like Pennsylvania, very geographically, it may be mostly white, but geographically diverse. And you're dealing with larger sampling errors for these individual subgroups. It is harder to do. All right, so let's get inside of this. Let's get inside this here. Alex, some inside baseball. Let's take some of these today. Some inside baseball from Savannah, Georgia. Our GOP convention could not agree on the leadership and split it. The Patriots split over Perdue versus Taylor for governor. Now establishment is Kemp, but Taylor supports Libertarian. And that's a little bit of a fracture. I think ultimately in the end, and we can go over, if we have time today, we can go over some of our Georgia data. We just put it up, but we have Kemp pretty comfortably ahead. There are a ton of Republicans, however, that do not like him. But I think what happened is you saw Trump and his surrogates basically say, okay, when we lost for Purdue. Now we want everyone to, beat Stacey Abrams. So everyone needs to vote for Brian Kemp. And for the most part, our polling suggests that is happening. You know what's funny, though? While we do have Walker up now, there are some Kemp voters who are establishment Republicans who are not behind Walker. So it really goes to show you how this establishment block of the population, it feels entitled to your vote, but they don't feel obligated to support your base candidate back. All right, it's worth remembering moving forward. All right, but CNN poll, Republicans backed by enthusiasm and economic concerns hold a narrow edge ahead of next week's congressional election. It's not a narrow edge. When you get into it, it's really not. CNN SSRS, they were D+3 last month. They are now R+2. This poll had an even generic ballot going into 2014. Republicans won it by over 5 points. This poll, I don't have to tell you, they did change pollsters after a big bomb. But in 2016, obviously, except for the state of Nevada, overstated Democratic support quite a bit. 18, they were abysmal. They had Gillum up by 12. It just very bad polling by this company. And then 2020, they basically doubled the support for the Democratic candidates on the generic ballot. This is one of the polls that led to this Cook Politico narrative that Democrats were poised to pick up 15 seats. In the end, Republicans won every single toss-up, rated toss-up by Cook Politico report. They won 5 seats that were leans Democrat. They won 2 seats that were likely Democrat. And it was fueled by this poll. Okay? That narrative was fueled by this and others, but this is one of those polls that fueled that narrative. Fox was another one, by the way. So I'm not picking on CNN. All right. The survey shows that Democratic enthusiasm is significantly lower than it was in 2018, when the Democratic Party took control of the House. Republican voters in the new poll expressed greater engagement with this year's midterm election than Democrats across multiple questions gauging likelihood of vote. Without a doubt. I mean, there's no way you could find Democrats with a greater enthusiasm, interest, likelihood to vote, the vote history from the voters that are picking up and talking to us, Republicans are significantly more solid in vote history and among certain to vote. I don't know any candidate who leads in our polling that we've done. Of course, we've been very picky with which polls we were able to, put resources behind with states and contests. But, whether it's Nevada, Arizona, Wisconsin, Georgia, anywhere, there is simply no state where the Democratic candidate is ahead in the certain to vote or most likely to vote categories. They're not. They trail, and they most of the time, I think all but one of those states, they trail outside of the lead of the Republican overall. So if Kari Lake led by 3.7 overall in our latest poll, then among certain votes, she leads by like 5 point something, right? So anyway, and by the way, you saw that in the Fox poll that those are up only by 1. Overall, 27% of registered voters say they're extremely enthusiastic about this vote. And I want to say something about the Fox poll. The gap between, if you were watching What Are the Odds last night, you saw it firsthand. The gap between Blake Masters and Kari Lake has now shrunk, and it's shrunk quite a bit. It's anywhere between like 2 and 3 points, all right? And honestly, it's looking more like 2. There's a consolidation going on, and while Kari Lake does better among independents, Blake Masters has started to pick it up among independents. The gap between these two candidates have shrunk. So if they would have put Lake in the lead by like 3 or 4, like many other polls are showing, Blake Masters would have been ahead of Mark Kelly. So if you're them and you don't want to give Blake Masters the lead, maybe you just are too scared to be the first one to do it. Believe me, we're human. This happens. Then you're going to limit or minimize Kari Lake's lead because your numbers don't support anything lower than a Lake +1 unless you intend to put Blake Masters in the lead. Because that gap, if you were watching the show yesterday, you saw the raw data in Arizona as we were interviewing people last night. That is the second night. It was about 327 interviews that we looked at last night. It's on top of 300 and change that we had interviewed on Monday night. There wasn't that big of a difference. Actually, the data looked a little bit better for Democrats. A little bit better. But still, if you were watching last night, you could see it was not good. And it was highly educated, very independent. And again, 5% of we know they're registered Democrats. We know they are. Roughly 5% refused to admit they were registered Democrats. They were calling themselves either, independent or something else. All right. That's a bad sign for a party. It's not a good sign. Overall, 27% of registered voters say they're extremely enthusiastic about voting this year, down from 37 just ahead of the 2018 elections. The decline in enthusiasm comes almost entirely among Democrats. 4 years ago, 44% of Democratic registered voters said they were extremely enthusiastic about voting. Now, just 24% say the same. Among Republicans, the number has dipped only narrowly from 43 to 38. That's a massive decline among Democrats, folks. Massive. It's a 14-point enthusiasm edge. If you don't think that matters, you're not paying attention to the early vote. People always try to read the early vote tea leaves. I always tell them not to, because the things that you can infer that are helpful from it, they don't focus on. They always try to read too much into it. They make too many assumptions instead of the baseline stuff that Robert and I always tell you to focus on. Demographics. Juxtapositions from one year to the other. And still you don't know who those people voted for. Still. Although and we're going to talk about that in Nevada, North Carolina, Florida. Big things are going on. Although overall enthusiasm about voting now is lower than in October 2010, the Republican enthusiasm advantage now is similar to the partisan gap found in CNN polling back then, ahead of a very strong GOP midterm performance. And by the way, they understated GOP performance back then. Back then, as of now, Republican voters were 14 points more likely to say they were extremely enthusiastic about voting in the midterms. 31% of Republican voters were extremely enthusiastic versus 17% of Democratic voters. Understand this gap is, let's just say, comparable. In the new poll, Republicans top about Democrats on the generic ballot question, asking voters, well, obviously, 51 to 47 among likely voters. narrowly outside the polls margin of error. So there's, oh, actually, that's right. The other one is R+2. This is R+4. That's not a, they're saying that they have a slight edge. This is CNN spinning misinformation about their own poll. A 4-point Republican lead, one which has Republican support above 50%. Without getting into the weeds and getting nerdy on you as a pollster, because I love it, we don't talk enough about what a poll means, what they're saying when they have a candidate or a party above 50%. It is statistically significant, and it means that there is very, very, very little chance that this is not going to turn out or shake out the way that the poll suggests. Now, obviously, we've seen misses with that. We've seen tons of polls where Democrats were above 50 and lost. There's a problem with the polling industry. We haven't seen too many polls where the Republicans were above 50 and didn't either, perform on par or perform better. And that's what I want to focus on today, the likelihood of outcome based on what we know, what we've seen from the past, what is really predictive, wrapping all these things we've been talking about up into a ball and saying, is it more likely that Democrats are going to overperform in the Senate because the Senate polls suggest that? Or is it more likely that the national polls are probably understating the Republican advantage and they're catching something that the state polls haven't caught yet? Is that what has happened in other elections in the past? Or is it more likely that Chris Hahn on Fox News is right? It is highly likely that Chris Hahn is going to make an ass of himself again. The Monmouth poll will make an ass of themselves again. Highly likely. Among registered voters, the race is about even, with 47% behind the Republicans and the 46% behind the Democrats. That's actually pretty close to what we have. They have a +4 among likely voters. We have a +5. They have a +1 among registered voters. We have a +2. Closely divided generic ballot numbers have often translated into Republican gains in the House. And it's in fact also true of the Senate. They're pretending as if that's not true. Notice they left the Senate out there because they want you to believe their Senate polls they came out with last week. They want you to think Ron Johnson only has a 1-point lead. Republicans standing in the battle for the House this year is bolstered by broad concerns about the state of the nation's economy. Inflation and the economy are far and away the top issue for likely voters in the final stretch, with about half of all, 51. I mean, does any of this sound familiar to you guys? Saying those will be key issues determining the vote in Congress. Abortion, the second ranking issue, lands at only 15%. Does this sound familiar to you? Other issues tested were chosen by fewer than 10%. And look at, voting rights and election integrity was 9, gun policy 7, immigration. That's because they didn't put immigration and border security. And by the way, if they would have put environment and climate change, then you would have gotten a higher number for that, probably slightly. And we do policing, crime, and safety. It just said crime. That's why our crime number is a little bit higher, because these issues mean different things to different voters. And if you don't give them both, they did good here, voting rights and election integrity. So they got 9%. We say, because voting rights is a BS phrase for what the Democratic Party position is. It is more accurate to try to say election reform and election integrity. Voting rights is not an accurate description of the Democratic position. All right? Election reform is. But anyway, you want to try to talk to both sides of the argument so they understand that you mean them. All right? Republicans and independent likely voters are broadly focused on the economy. 71% of Republicans, 53% of independents. Democratic voters are more split, with the economy and abortion their top issue at nearly equal shares. 29 say abortion, 27% say the economy and inflation. They're lumping together the economy. We say economy and jobs, and then cost of living and inflation. But if you combine them, they're very, very similar. Very similar. Listen, and even with Democrats, we find that, Democrats do say cost of living and inflation. chunk of them, but slightly more say abortion. They are fueling the concerns over abortion. Independents don't give a damn. Overall, 75% of Americans say the economy is in a recession, up from 64% who felt that way this summer. All right, so this is just getting really, really bad when you drill down into it. Only 41% approve of the job Joe Biden's doing. That's down from 44. And by the way, they gave you that number for adults. Among likely voters, it's at 42. And it's basically where they had Trump and Obama. I think it's very clear. It is not unfair to say that is not Donald Trump's real approval rating before the midterm elections. We had him at 45% right before the midterm elections. He rose from 43 to 45. It isn't likely that they were able to gauge Donald Trump's true approval rating, considering how badly they gauged his true support. This is why I always say that the ultimate test for a pollster is on election day. If they don't do a decent job on election day, then you really can't trust what they say about approval ratings, direction of country, even support for policies. All right, so this poll was conducted from 26 to 31. All right, so ultimately, that's most of really where I want to go with this. But interestingly enough, there is a lot more confidence in Republicans than there is in Democrats, even among people who call themselves moderate. They're doing everything in their power to try to word questions to make it more difficult for Republicans, and yet it didn't really work. All right, so that's about it for CNN. Let's pull up another one because they piggyback off of what CNN is saying, and then we're gonna talk about a little bit about what this means. Okay, this now is a registered voter poll. All right, so compare it to, they don't wait for education. It's one of the most friendly Democratic polls, one of the least accurate polls out there. That's the truth. It understates Republican support considerably. For instance, this poll had Richard Cordray winning the governor's race in Ohio in 2018 by 7 points. Richard Cordray got his butt kicked. It was a 12-point miss. They also overstated, again, Democratic support on the generic ballot in 18. Them and the LA Times were among the worst. All right, so give me 2 seconds here, get a little sip. They are echoing the same thing we've been saying. And by the way, key GOP groups are more fired up to vote in midterms than Democrats. They didn't want to give you the headline number, which is Republican +2. Registered voter, Republican +2. And an unweighted for education, Republican +2. All right. Heading into the final week of voting, Democrats' key-based voter levels of enthusiasm are far below that of Republican-based voter groups. In the latest NPR PBS NewsHour Marist survey before voting wraps up on Tuesday, the cross-currents of this election are combining to make for uncertainty and volatility with just days to go. Most midterms are a referenda on the sitting president and the party in power. That is largely the case with Biden's approval rating slipping again. Democrats are losing ground on which party voters want to control Congress, and inflation being the top issue, with voters saying they trust Republicans more on this issue by 20 points. Wait until you see the issues that are most important and then the leads for Republicans. Preserving democracy and abortion have also been key and usually motivating factors, as former President Trump, whom the poll found as equally unpopular as Biden, has weighed in heavily in these elections. He's endorsed scores of candidates, many of whom have emulated him, perpetrating his election lies and struggle in purple states. No poll should ever add this much commentary. This is not what your job is. And Marist, you should be ashamed of yourself to let them do this to your work. Just the facts, ma'am, when it comes to a poll. I'll hit the Gateway Pundit for doing it, and I'll hit this company for doing it. Just as they shouldn't say things like, if Kerry Lake loses the primary and Blake Masters lose the primary, the election was clearly stolen by the establishment. That is not okay either. I would be furious as a pollster if they put up blatantly partisan statements like this in my work.
The poll also found, though, that Republican voters are largely okay with voting for an election denier. By the way, let's cut this right now. Democrats voted for election deniers up and down the ballot in 2018 and 2020. Nobody denies election results better and more often than Democrats. Elected Democrats and their voters. There was zero evidence that Donald Trump stole the election from Hillary Clinton. Yet Hillary Clinton still to this day wanders around telling people that. The Washington Post has been the leading election denier newspaper in the last two presidential elections that Democrats lost. They published all sorts of stories about hacked machines and power grid failures that are total nonsense just to support some narrative that Hillary Clinton lost unfairly. They did it to George W. Bush too. They spent millions of dollars trying to prove that George W. Bush in fact lost Florida, and it proved the exact opposite. Their whole upper echelon was fired and the paper was revamped. Yet they're still denying elections. So I hate this talk. And again, this isn't for a poll. Especially since we know that more than half of Democratic voters in the midterm election, it's right in the exit polls, believe that Trump was illegitimate. That he won because the election was stolen. Don't give me this crap. 1,586 adults, 1,469 registered voters. This was conducted between October 24th to 27th. Couple of days before. So what does this say? It says that since Big Data poll released Republican +5, the situation has gotten worse for Democrats. Independents and suburban women, educated independents, are breaking big to Republicans, and Democrats are not coming out. No matter what you hear Tom Boner from Target Smart say on Twitter, Boner doesn't know what he's talking about. Tom Boner, Tiny Boner. How about that? Let's just refer to him as Tiny Boner from now on. Since he is one of the biggest hacks on Twitter and in the election mafia crowd, we have to give him a proper name for his contribution to election coverage. Republicans hold the enthusiasm edge. While white women with college degrees, who are an important bloc for Democrats, are among the most enthusiastic to vote, black voters, Latinos, and young voters are among the least. And the problem is, they're not winning the white women with college degrees in the suburbs the way they had in the last two elections in 20 and 18. They are not. At the same time, older voters, Trump voters, white evangelical Christians, and rural voters, all key GOP groups are fired up to vote. Those without college degrees are less enthusiastic about the election, but that's driven by voters of color without degrees. Guys, how often, I mean, does this not sound like they were watching episodes of Inside the Numbers when we went over our generic ballot and they basically copied and pasted? I mean, this is exactly what I've been telling you for weeks now. Weeks. And in fact, it's what I've been telling you for 8 months. 8 months. The picture is returning to what it looked like before the summer, when screwy summer polling always happens. And by the way, the scam always happens. This happened in 2014, pre-Trump. It happened in 2016. It was probably one of the worst. It happened in 2018. Joe Donnelly was still going to win Indiana. All right, let's keep going. Heidi Heitkamp was going to keep her seat against Kramer. 14, we discussed about on Twitter earlier. Sam Brownback was doomed. Fox News had Paul Davis up 6 points over Sam Brownback in their final poll. That's why I'm not moving governor of Kansas. Because in GOP years, the understatement of Republican support is even more pronounced than in years when we either have a relatively even playing field or a Democratic edge. They all always understate Republican support, but in Republican environments, that understatement in state polls is so much more significant. Joe Donnelly +7. Notably, showing why midterm elections tend to be base elections, independents are also way down the list when it comes to enthusiasm. That's not really true. Independents are always way down the list. Always. They are always more undecided. They're always less enthusiastic. They're always less certain to vote. That is always the case. What we found this year is that independents who intend to vote Republican are much more amped than independents who intend to vote Democrat, which could make for a pretty damn big miss. Because you may think independents are only going for the Republican candidate by, let's say, 5. They end up going by like 13 or 15. And your poll is blown wide open. Baby boomers, 87%. That's always also the case. Older voters are always more certain and more enthusiastic to vote. Republicans, 84. And by the way, let's compare that to Democrats, 68. White women, college educated, 86. All right. And that's a Democratic group. The problem is it's not as Democratic as it was. We have 4-year degrees actually slightly Republican right now nationally, and that's because of educated independents and educated men. But the white woman with a college degree margin for Democrats needs to be 15, 20 points. It's not. It's single digits. Even if they win them by like 10, it's not enough. And that's college degree, meaning they may even have a post-grad, advanced degree, master's, right? White evangelical Christians, 79. White men, college educated, see, 78. White men, no college, 76. Rural, 75. White women, no college, 70. No college, 66. And that is true of our polling as well. Technically, the working class overall is less educated, but that is due in our polling as well to black voters largely and some Hispanics, but black voters largely who are not at all enthusiastic. And because black voters who tend to be, look, see, they got them at 55. They have Latino a little higher at 58. That's believable. Annual income of 50,000 or less is 59. That's a Democratic group. So when you hear this thing, by the way, because I want to speak to this as well. When you hear this thing that's, oh yeah, it's the educated, you know, Democrats have the upper tier and they have the welfare class. All right. I don't mean to say it in a derogatory way. It is what it is. It's the welfare class. Why, if we break it down like we do, and we'll just combine 50 to 100 or 50 to 75, but we do 25 increments. So if you really look at like 30,000, 25,000 or below, that is the block of 50,000 and below. That is so overwhelmingly Democrat that it makes the 50,000 and below a Democratic voting group. The most loyal Republican voter is one that does not have a college degree at all, yet makes a lot of money. Why? Because they've worked their ass off for that income. That's why. So this concept of, you know, well, it's only the stupid people and those dumb working class Walmart shoppers. No, it really depends on what Walmart shopper. Are they paying with an EBT card or are they paying with their hard-earned money? You want to insult people? Independents are at 58%, no lean independents. And what that means is if they said they were independent, they maybe tried to lean them a little bit. These are people who, in other words, okay, you're an independent, but who do you lean towards? Like, remember our closely aligned views? Which views more closely align with yours? I get you're an independent, but are you more aligned with the Republican Party, the Democratic Party, equally aligned, or maybe you don't share anything in common with either? If they said, more in line with the Democratic Party, then they got leaned into the lean Democrat, obviously. All right. They're saying this had to do with time, you know, before the Supreme Court's decision overturning Roe. Democrat enthusiasm was way below that of Republicans, but activism, fundraising, and interest in these elections went way up. They've closed the enthusiasm gap, and we're on par with GOP voters over the summer and into September. No, they weren't. No, they weren't. That's bullcrap. You just weren't reaching them because you're the Marist poll, and you don't reach working class. Look in your crosstabs. You have to wait up ridiculously And they don't even weight by education. They weight by income and other things like that. In the last few weeks, however, as more voters have begun tuning into the election, and with inflation persistently high, Republican enthusiasm has outpaced Democrats. It's not so much that Democrats aren't gaining in their enthusiasm levels. They are. It's that Republicans have increased theirs by more in that time. You know, I think that I kind of agree with that, but I don't attribute that to Dobbs. I attribute that to the freaking election is closer and voters start to tune in more. Democrats are also losing ground on the generic ballot test. In this survey, it's tied 46-46, and that tends to be the bad news for the Democrats. Among registered voters, it is. Anyway, let's look. The remain, inflation, abortion, and preserve. Oh, this poll was even in 2014. Let me check. Let's do their 2014 generic ballot. Let's see if I can find it. Election 214. Come on. Where are we? I'm seeing some new polls out too that are kind of bad for Democrats. We'll get into it. All right. Where are we? Oh, this is Election Central 218. Why did it take me here? Okay. 2014 RCP generic ballot. Let's just look that up. Sorry about that. Usually I have this stuff teed up, but RCP can be kind of heavy on the stream. The NPR poll, where are you? Marist didn't put out a generic ballot. Oh, I'm thinking of the NBC News Wall Street Journal poll. That was tied. Fox News was Democrat +1. CNN, Democrat +1. USA Today, Democrat +1. Really, only the ABC News poll got it. And Rasmussen. That's about it. Pew Research, Democrat +1. Yeah, it doesn't look like Marist put out a generic ballot that year. Interesting. It was a lot of Quinnipiacs and Rasmussen's, Fox News, CBS, ABC. They didn't catch it until the end. The RCP average was Republican 2.4. All right. It ended up Republicans actually won the House vote by about 5.7, almost 6 points. All right. But again, a lot of these big media polls never gave them the edge. Never. All right. This is what matters here. Top issues remain inflation, abortion, and preserving democracy. All right. So even in the heavily liberal Marist poll, let's look at some of these issues. Republicans are trusted by wide margins on inflation, R+7, crime, R+16, and immigration, R+12. Holy moly. And the Democratic edge is nowhere near that consistent when it comes to some of these peripheral issues. On healthcare, Democrats, it's D+14. Abortion is only D+13. And preserving democracy is only D+11. That is not very serious. Here's more of this election denier crap. Oh my God, a majority of Republicans say they're very likely to vote for someone who thought incorrectly that the election was stolen. That's compared to 1 in 5 Democrats and a third of independents. But that's bullcrap, because if you polled it in 18, Democrats were majority okay and believed that Trump stole the election. So this kind of stuff, it's not even bias. That's not the word for it. It's dishonesty, it's propaganda, it's corruption, it's ideological corruption. And, this is another very, very big issue. By a wide margin now, 53-38, that the voters do not want a divided government. You understand what that means? They're not going to vote for the Republican Party down ballot, but not at the Senate level. They don't want a divided government. In years like 18, when they said divided government was a good thing, independence specifically, that you can foresee, that it's reasonable to think, anyway, that they'll vote for the Democrat in Indiana 1, but they're going to vote for Mike Braun in the Senate, not Joe Donnelly. That's the kind of environment where you can expect maybe somewhat even robust ticket splitting, or at least certainly more than we saw under the era of Obama, which was 0 ticket splits. Zero. We just didn't have state ticket splitting like that under Obama. You polarized the country way too much. Here they're saying we don't want divided government. That means, considering they're ready to throw Joe Biden out of office, they don't even want him in office anymore. They're not going to vote Democrat. There'll be some splits. There'll be some ticket splitting. I'm not saying there's not going to be. I'm saying the environment favors straight ticket voting. And this is something that these state polls can miss. They can miss this. They miss it more often than they don't. All right. So that generally is where I'm going. All right. So take this, put it in your cap. We're going to do a break here in a second, but take what I'm saying here and put it in a cap, because in the next segment, we're going to talk about some of these shifts that we're seeing and then what they mean in some of these battleground states. Are these state level polls, maybe in some they are, but are they capturing the totality of this? And then you have to understand, and I know you do because you're smart and you listen, and you could figure a lot of this out on your own. In certain regions, it's much worse. Much worse. For instance, Pennsylvania. It is much more likely that Monmouth poll will either meet or exceed their average error of over 5 points in the state of Pennsylvania, and Oz will win by 2, maybe even 3. It's more likely that Oz overperforms the Monmouth poll and the New York Times poll. You can't go back in time, folks, in the last 4 election cycles. Go back and try to find me a race. Going back to 2016, what I like about 2016, doing this, we've always liked 4 cycle rolling averages when we look at historical data like this, because it will include periods of when both parties had good runs. Elections where both parties can say they had a good cycle. So then we have a nice, good, wide berth, a nice wide spread of data points that we can take. It was a good Republican year here. It was a good Democratic year here. How did the polls perform in those years versus each other, right? How did they compare? And then over 4 cycles, how well overall is does that picture tell us that pollster is done? I dare you to go back in the 4 cycle history and find me where Monmouth poll in the Midwest and the Mid-Atlantic, which is, you could call Pennsylvania Mid-Atlantic, where they did not. Where in some instance where the Republican underperformed the Monmouth poll. I dare you. It doesn't exist. All right. So is it more likely with all of these shifts that we're seeing, and we're still not even done? The early vote is telling us, and in the next segment, I said before, don't read the early vote tea leaves the way they do it. There are a few things that really it can tell us that they don't focus on. In the next segment, we'll talk a little bit about that, what those things are, and whether or not it supports the national spread, the national trend that we're seeing. Some of the cheap polls are supporting that at the state level and district level, or is it that we should throw all of this out, throw all of the early voting out, actual behavior, throw all of these data points out in favor of the Monmouth poll telling you that John Fetterman is still going to win by 4 points? I mean, it gets a little absurd, folks. I mean, it gets to the point where you really have to start to be an idiot to believe it over and over and over again. Greg Orman by 6, baby. Greg Orman by 6. Paul Davis going to romp it. Let's go to a quick break. All right. Food shortages. They're real. You know it. I know it. Got to protect your family against them. Drought, inflation, weather, even new government policies. They're all pushing America's food supply to its breaking point. That's why survival food is more important than ever. Create your own stockpile of the best-selling Ford Patriots food survival kits like Laura and I have done for our family today. It's not ordinary food. This stuff is good for 25 years, hand-packed right in a family-owned facility in the USA. The kits are compact, they're sturdy, they're water-resistant, light-resistant, they stack easily, and they have different delicious breakfasts, lunches, dinners. You can make these meals in less than 20 minutes. Just add boiling water, simmer, and serve. Go to 4patriots.com/TPP to get your 3-month survival kit. That is the foundation. I'm telling you, that kit is the foundation of your preparations. It really is. All right. You'll get their famous guarantee for an entire year, by the way, with it, and 10 free gifts plus free shipping. They're called 4 Patriots because a portion of every sale is donated to charities to support our veterans and their families. Just go to 4patriots.com/TPP to build your own stockpile like Laura and I have done today. And while you're at it, if you're surfing, like I said, the 3-month survival is the foundation to your preparation. But if you go and surf their awesome website, don't forget, if you're going to buy anything else, so a couple of you got that generator. If you're going to buy anything else, do not forget to use promo code TPP10. Promo code TPP10 at checkout to get 10% off your entire site-wide order. All right, again, 4patriots.com/TPP to build your own stockpile today. Anybody check the markets? When I was on with Steve earlier, it was bombing again. It was down again. Maybe it's bounced back, but we all know that there's structural issues with this economy. We know it. There's also obviously no end to an inflation in sight. It just isn't. At least not yet. See what a new Republican Congress can do. All right. But for now, this is where we're at, and we're forced to deal with it. All right. The last time we saw the stock market in this position, it lost basically half its value. The US dollar lost 46% of its value. The price of oil quadrupled. And yet, while the economy collapsed, inflation ran through the roof. The price of gold shot up $1,300, silver $2,400. So if history repeats itself, we could see it happen again. Can you afford to miss what could be the biggest gold and silver boom of our generation? I won't. That's why I want you to visit tpplikesgold.com. Because when you do, you'll not only get the chance to protect your retirement savings with gold and silver, you could get $10,000 or more in free silver just for doing it. It's a rare opportunity. So don't miss what could be your best opportunity to protect your retirement savings from inflation and terrible market conditions. Visit tpplikesgold.com. That's tpplikesgold.com. Get your free kit, mull it over, check it out. Diversification, diversification, diversification. All right. Let's take a look at, let's put something else in the pipe here. Where are we at here? Where'd you go? I lost you. I lost you. Oh, no. Oh, for now, I'll put up the latest Senate forecast while we go over it. Let's go through the states, shall we? I had a lot of appearances and stuff to do this morning, so it hasn't updated. So you're going to hear it first, okay? All right, we got the Senate election model up. You might notice that Nevada is back to being darker red than Arizona. All right. That is, again, because of what some of the stuff we have got done. And Arizona, today will be our last day of interviews. Our own polling will absolutely outweigh public polling when it comes to any state. And that's true of Arizona. In Georgia, we went there first. We saw what we saw. It was, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution also had Walker back up in their final poll, and they are a liberal, left-leaning poll. They are not like the University of Georgia, which has tended to give Republicans a pretty decent share. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution has been extremely left-wing. All right, from the special elections between Ossoff and Handel to the specials and runoffs between Ossoff and Perdue and Loeffler and Warnock, they have not. And by the way, the New York Times overstated Democrats in those races as well. So we knew, looking at Georgia being, the generic ballot was Republican plus 10 statewide, a little bit over Republican plus 10. Brian Kemp is now, as we went over last night, likely, it's not safe. Florida was moved solidly Republican. It was not ever competitive. But Kemp, hitting that double-digit mark, having, like we were talking about early, with the inside baseball comment we put up, we could see that there were going to be plenty of Republicans to vote for him, and he was doing so much better with independent voters. We have Walker leading with independents as well. So I'm not really sure some of these polls that have Kemp and Walker losing independents. Kemp lost them by 10 and 18 against Stacey Abrams. And by the way, he still won. But this time we have Kemp winning those voters. So we saw what we saw in Georgia. Other people kind of came around to it after we were already in the field and we knew. So we that's why we put more emphasis on ourselves. We trust ourselves more. In 2014 and 2016, some of the modeling issues that had occurred came from, well, not so much in 2016 because we greatly devalued their weights as an impact on the model. The fundamentals only model outperforms the polls only model. And the polls, kind of the hybrid, which we use now, we just, in order to make sure we didn't have any problems like we did in 2014, like North Carolina, for instance, it's still a hybrid. It's just great. It's not taking the polls at face value the way it used to. And by the way, some of the national polling and indicators like right track, wrong track, at the state level too, that stuff matters more than the overall head-to-head, which has not been predictive. And for some reason, polls this year, these pollsters feel the need to say, polls are snapshots in time. They're not predictive. That absolutely is true. It's a true statement. Why then are there models supposedly claiming to predict election outcomes? Why? Based on polls. They're not predictive, remember? Believe me, folks, if this was a pro-democratic year, people would not be amending their press releases to say, polls aren't meant to be predictive. You find General Bolduc up? Better put it in there that polls aren't meant to be predictive. Anyway, that's why Nevada is back to being darker than Arizona. And because we were concluding the early vote period in the state of Nevada, whereas we have not done that yet for Arizona, because we're doing, I can actually say it now. Pretty exciting. We're conducting an exit poll in Arizona. And then we're conducting this pre-election poll. So we will be looking much more at a more granular level at the early vote and the poll, and comparing that to some of the polling, and then later the exit polling results, is what we actually see in the real vote, what we're seeing, in the polling, and it'll give us a much better idea of whether or not we're either overstating or understating a certain vote. All right. With that said, in Nevada, the early vote. Forget about what Tiny Boner is saying at Target Smart, okay? Tiny Boner has no idea what he's talking about. The deluge of mail-in votes that Democrats would need from Clark County to stop two things. One is the shift among Hispanic votes. They didn't get it. And the reason they didn't get it is because of that shift. Their deluge, their firewall, as John Ralston says, their firewall was a Hispanic firewall. Big, well, at least in great numbers anyway. They didn't get it this year because those people don't intend to vote Democrat. Democrats would be lucky if they just didn't show up. Because if they do, there are many who are very likely to vote against them. That is what our polling in Nevada will show. I voted for Joe Biden, but I'm voting for Adam Laxalt. That is happening, and it's happening in very serious consistent, ways. With Lombardo and his history as the sheriff in Vegas, it is very possible that both Lombardo and Laxalt eke out their Democratic opponents in Clark County. I am kidding. I kid you not. It is much more likely that maybe they do a little bit better, since that white educated vote did shift back to Republicans, especially suburban women. It is more likely they do better in Reno, and let's say they edge out Democrats in Washoe County by maybe, 2 to 5, right? And then they are very close in Clark. And then together with the rest of the state, they pull a 3 to 5 point win, maybe even more in Lombardo's case possible. But it's also possible that it's basically a blowout because they both win. Laxalt has his own name that is very well known in that state. All right. So his performance in Clark is extremely impressive to me. And then Lombardo has his own history as the sheriff there. And with them together, kind of playing off of each other. Oh, I know Lombardo. I'm voting for him in Clark, right? And then down ticket or up ticket, they'll see Laxalt, and maybe they don't know him as well, but they're going to vote for Lombardo, and so they decide I'm going straight Republican this time. That's why Nevada 1 and 3 are in such serious trouble. And then the flip side of that is maybe there's an older voter, and they're like, I know Laxalt. I'm not too, I know Lombardo. I'm not too keen on him. What happened in Vegas, for instance? Who knows? Why didn't we ever get an answer on that? The Vegas shooting, right? Something like that. But since I'm voting for Laxalt, I'm going to vote for Lombardo. There's could be something going on there, this dynamic where they play off of each other, their name recognition among different voting groups. All right. So we're now up to 60% likelihood. It's going to go higher because early voting now is that's a wrap, folks. That's a wrap. Democrats simply did not get what they needed. Republicans voted pretty heavily in the early vote comparatively, but we know that Nevada is, for Republicans, an election day stomping ground. They love to vote in big, big numbers on election day. And by the way, this time we did see tightening with Hispanics, but widening with whites. That being said, I'm still thoroughly impressed by both Lombardo and Laxalt's performance among Hispanics. I just really, even though Nevada tends to be the one state historically where polls did overstate Republican support, I did not in 2016. In fact, hold on. To give you the straight up numbers. Sip of coffee while I wait. Dun, dun, dun. It's Colorado, Florida, Iowa, Michigan, New Hampshire. Okay, so we did have Trump up in October, Trump by 2, and then going toward the end of November, we did have Trump up by 5. It tightened again to a tie, and then Hillary Clinton took a 2-point lead. So we didn't overstate Trump. CNN, like I said, that was one state where they did. It was Trump plus 6 or something like that. We haven't had that issue, and I think that issue may be over because there was a lot of talk about the Harry Reid machine, whether or not it would finally fizzle out. I think it has. Folks, we just didn't see the Harry Reid machine kick into gear during early voting like we always do. And that has always been the primary reason why Democrats were understated in the polls. By the way, Emerson, they did horrible in Florida and in the Rust Belt. They did terrible. And I would argue actually they didn't nail Arizona because Arizona, blah, blah, blah. All right. But they did well in state like Nevada and Arizona. And yet they have Laxalt up by 5, an even greater number than we do. I'm being a little bit more conservative, but I absolutely can see a 5-point or more fairly big blowout. I could see it happening. The numbers are there to make that happen. All right. So when we're done with Arizona, we will move it. We still have it leaning to Blake Masters simply because a lot of people are like, well, no, Arizona is not a state where Republicans were understated. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. In 2018, if you look at the polls that are on the board right now, it was only like 2 polls that switched the lead to McSally in their final poll. Sinema was overstated by everybody leading up into that election. And then finally it shifted and the RCP average moved. From 2018, 2020, really the GOP were understated by about 2 points in Arizona. It's a very small margin, but it's about 2 points. And then right now, that would put Blake Masters slightly in the lead. Damn close, but slightly in the lead. And the New York Times, look, the New York Times is like, when in doubt, give the Democrat a 6-point lead. Like, that's how little I think of the New York Times poll. Yeah, so bad, folks. So bad. It's just that they are a big name, so they get the benefit of the doubt all the time. All right, so, and yes, in PA, Edmund, the Senate race is first, and could that help straight ticket tendencies? I imagine it will with some of these voters that we are talking to. It's just, but again, too, look, like I said, I think there's going to be, I think that there's going to be a big miss in Arizona. It's going to be, I mean, a big miss this year. It will be a state like Pennsylvania, and it'll be like Doug Mastriano specifically. And there were just some voters that, I don't know, there's not this big bias that surrounding Mehmet Oz that there is surrounding Doug Mastriano. And it kind of makes sense. He doesn't have money. I think Robert made a great point last night. It really is these two media markets in Pittsburgh and in Philadelphia. Tri-state area is extremely expensive. The Philadelphia media market is incredibly expensive. So I think it is specifically hurting him there, whereas Oz has been on the air at least and has been able to fire back. Doug Mastriano has not. So what I'm saying is it definitely matters. And then when you look in some more conservative areas, it does appear that the margin is closer than we know it's going to be. Right? We know it. And then in places in the Northeast, for instance, Lackawanna, Pike, Monroe, there are competitive, what they shouldn't even be battlegrounds, but that's how bad the position for Democrats is right now. There are, where people are going to vote for the Republican congressional candidate who they'll be switching. These are swings. And they may not know that much about Doug Mastriano, but because they're going to vote for Oz and the congressional candidate, without a doubt, there'll be people who just don't know Mastriano. He polls worse, but on election day, they'll go ahead and vote for him. We have Shapiro up by a little over 4.4 or something like that. It's close enough to be. It really is close enough to be an upset. It is, but as you can see, we do have that race leaning to the Democrat. All right, and just to give you. It's leaning, but it's just under likely. And that's because of the money disparity and our own polling, which has a lot of weight. Like, look, it's definitely something happening here. We have it 65% Shapiro. But another way to think about that is it's still 35% chance, Mastriano could win. I just think that it clearly is favoring Shapiro. I do. Money matters, folks. It does. And as sad as that is, it is the reality. What else? What other updates can we look at? It's 104 already. I know it's time for my 30-second cut, but let's see. Some of these ridiculous prognosticators, a total joke. Hat tip to Tom Bevan for pointing out some of them. Roll call is a total joke at this point. You've got to be kidding me. In their Senate most vulnerable rankings, Catherine Cortez Masto is number 1. Raphael Warnock is number 2. Ron Johnson is number 3. More vulnerable than Mark Kelly. More vulnerable than Maggie Hassan. That rounds out number 4 and 5. They have Mike Lee at number 6. Number 6. More vulnerable than Patty Murray. This is lunacy. By the way, 2 recent polls just came out showing Lee with some pretty big leads. 10 and 19 points, the most recent polls this week. One is Lee by 10. The other one's Lee by 19. You've got to be kidding me. Michael Bennett is number 7. They have Mike Lee more vulnerable than Michael Bennett. They have Ron. I mean, this is just crazy. It's crazy. This Ron Johnson, number 3, because of this is the stuff that Fox polled. This is when they really tip you off, guys. Lake by 1, Kelly by 1, Johnson by 2. Oh my God. I just don't see the mathematical possibility that Ron Johnson. I mean, there's always a chance. But folks, no. No. A bit of a joke. Hey, what time is it in Arizona, guys? Is it time to start calling here? Anyway, yeah. Oh, the move by Cook. All right. Look, at least they moved it. 10 races that they moved, and we can talk about them if you want, because I do want to give a bit of a house update. But the fact is, they don't do this stuff equitably. All right. So anytime in 2018 that they made a big change to race ratings like they did in today, if they moved 10 seats, they would move the overall forecast. Okay. But they didn't. They just moved the 10 ratings, but still put up 17 seats R's, Republican pickup of 17 seats, which is in the middle roughly of their 12 to 25 range. Folks, we're beyond that now. 17 is a very low end. An average at this point pickup, you would have to say the average that's a low, folks. 17 is a low. 12 is not even believable anymore. I think we are well within the 30 to 33 seat range being the average, with a high end, no joke, of upwards of like 50 seats. It could happen because we're looking at this giant swing. Oh, that's what I forgot. I knew I forgot something. We didn't get enough time to go over. Yes, let me go over this. I knew I was forgetting something as the time was off. But I didn't get enough time on War Room to talk about this in greater detail, to explain what it means for the map. Both maps. So all three maps. All right? And let's do that. Even if I got a break in the middle of it, let's do it. All right. I'd rather just take a quick water sip break here. All right. Okay. So they felt the need to highlight one of their findings from their poll that was released yesterday. And that is that suburban woman number we were talking about last night with Barnes. But again, I'd like to talk a little bit more detail about it, okay? White suburban women swing toward backing Republicans for Congress. The Wall Street Journal poll shows key group of midterm voters favor the GOP by 15 percentage points. All right. White suburban women have significantly shifted their support from Democrats to Republicans in the closing days of midterm campaigning because of rising concerns over the economy and inflation. According to the Wall Street Journal poll, the new survey shows that white women living in suburban areas, who make up 20% of the electorate, now favor Republicans for Congress by 15 percentage points, moving 27 percentage points away from the Democrats since the poll from the Journal in August. It also suggests the topic of abortion rights has faded in importance as Democrats saw energy on that issue this summer in the wake of the Supreme Court decision in overturning Roe v. Wade. We're talking about a collapse, if you will, in the group on the perceptions of the economy, said Republican pollster Tony Fabrizio, who conducted the poll with Democratic pollster John Anzalone. The poll shows that 54% of white suburban women think the U.S. is already in a recession, and 74% think the economy is headed in the wrong direction. Views of the economy among the group were substantially more negative than in the Journal's most recent prior survey. In August, 43% thought the economy had entered a recession, and 59% said the economy was headed in the wrong direction. The movement comes as several voter groups are giving Republicans a boost in the final stretch before Election Day. And again, this is a registered voter poll. It's R+2, but it's a registered voter poll. We are R+2 in our registered voter. We're R+5 in our likely voter. CNN is R+1 in its registered voter. It's R+4 in its likely voter. So if all things are equal here, and they actually implemented the likely voter model that they indeed asked. I don't know why we didn't get a likely voter model, because they asked the questions for the voter model, but we didn't get it. So if all things were equal, the Journal poll would be R+5, not R+2. All right. White suburban women were a powerful force in the Democrats' sweeping victories in House races in 2018 when the party gained more than 40 seats, many of them in suburban districts, and retook control of the House. Democrats had been optimistic over the summer that abortion would help motivate this group to turn out and back their candidates in November. According to the survey, rising prices were the top issue motivating these voters, 34% putting them as their number one priority, followed by 28% citing threats to democracy and 16% choosing the Supreme Court overturning Roe. White suburban women trusted Republicans over Democrats to handle the economy and inflation. They also expressed more negative views toward the state of the country and President Biden's leadership compared with the previous surveys. So look, it's typically the case, as we've talked about before, that the president's approval rating actually begins to increase as we get closer to midterms. Obama's increased all the way to 47% before 2010 in some surveys. It depends who you're looking at. Biden's appeared to be rising a little bit in the summer and early fall, even before what is technically considered the fall. Right before Labor Day, right after Labor Day. But now it appears to be declining again. All right, a total of 85% of these voters said they were very motivated to vote, making them among the most motivated groups of those surveyed. Okay, so again, those who express more negative views on the state of the country, right track, wrong track, folks, and President Biden's leadership, 85% of these voters said they were motivated to vote. Dana Giannossi, 68 years old, Lincoln, California. Hold on. Said she already voted straight Republican ticket. A registered independent, leans Republican, but said she has never voted straight Republican before. Right now, I feel the Democrats are ruining our country, she said, citing her concerns about securing the southern border and high gas prices. We're on fixed incomes. I love this lady. This is the lady I love talking to. We're on fixed incomes, she said. The gas is unbelievable. Asked who has a better economic plan, 50% of this cohort said Republicans in Congress. Only 35% said Democrats. On inflation, 55% said Republicans would get it under control, and 24% said Democrats. In August, Democrats easily beat Republicans on the economic plans, though Republicans were ahead on the inflation question by a smaller margin. I don't know what the hell survey that was, but anyway, let me stop here and point out a little bit of a risk. And that risk is there are some voters, and we've pulled them too. We know who they are too. This one's a little bit, I would call her in between, but she's saying, I feel like Democrats are ruining our country. By the way, this kind of voter, North Korea launching ICBMs over Seoul the other night is the last thing Democrats really need to happen a week before Election Day or 6 days before Election Day, because it's going to add to this overall feeling of angst and feeling like the country is spinning out of control, that things are just generally since 2 years ago in the dumps. Meanwhile, what are they going to compare this to? Donald Trump damn near making a peace deal with Kim Jong-un. That's what they're going to compare it to. So it's a confirmation of the suspicion that things are just unstable. And Biden and the Democrats have destabilized things. All right. But the risk for both parties, let's say Republicans take over and inflation falls. Republicans are going to get a credit for that. However, let's say they don't stop the runaway spending. Inflation doesn't seem to fall. The supply chain doesn't get any better. Well, they're going to have some explaining to do, because most voters don't understand. Joe Biden vetoed everything. Republicans better fight this guy tooth and nail, because if they don't, they'll be blamed. Ruth Ann Ramsey, 76, of Darien, Connecticut, is an independent voter who has not made up her mind yet, but said she's leaning Republican because of her concerns about the economy. I think that generally I would trust Democrats on social issues, but trust the Republicans more on monetary issues. I think that the economy is number one in my mind. It's costing people so much more money to live. That woman is voting Republican. Believe me when I tell you, as someone who's been doing this for as long as I have, that woman is going to vote Republican. Wrong direction. Now it's 74% again. Right track, 19, even lower than us. This spread is even worse than our spread, ladies and gentlemen. Even worse than our spread. This matters. And I am stressing the point that you might not figure this out in a state poll or even definitely a district poll. They're notoriously volatile, notoriously inaccurate. It's like this idea starting in 2018, this happened because the media and the election mafia were so giddy about Democrats taking the House. They started to flood the zone with polls from congressional districts. Years before, go back and look and you'll see. Years before, that was not a thing. Why? Because everybody knew it. If you're a campaign pollster, that's one thing. You're paid an enormous amount of money to make sure that you get better data, more accurate data. But we're talking about much smaller population sizes, much larger error rates. So the media didn't even weigh into congressional district polling. They did not do that the way we see it today now. That started, it's a modern phenomenon, and it started in 2018. Generic ballot, that's all you got, guys. That's all you got. The media knew it. They didn't want some crazy, incorrect number. Take Nate Cohen at the New York Times. Robert and I were laughing at. Somehow you get the Democrat plus what, 14 or 16 in Kansas 3, which Biden barely won. Yet you have an R+4 national generic ballot. That is what is explaining that disparity. If it's R+4, Kansas 3 is a goner. Goner. A combined 66% of white suburban women also said rising costs are causing a major or minor financial strain, compared with 54% in August. Quote, "It is impacting us personally. I came out with a few grocery bags and I paid $120, said Susan Smith, 76, of Percasey, Pennsylvania, a Republican who plans to vote for the GOP. I eat Cheerios every morning and they've doubled in price." Overall, we don't need a history lesson. We know consumer prices are out of control. Overall, white women trust Republicans more on crime and foreign policy. They said Democrats were better able to deal with lower prescription drug prices. The parties were closely tied on which is better to handle issues of abortion and education. Folks, where's the bright spot for Democrats here? Where's the silver lining? Where is the silver lining that suggests that Mark Kelly has a 6-point lead still in Arizona, that John Fetterman has a 4 to 7-point lead still, according to some of these garbage polls? Where on earth is the evidence for this? Because polls in the battleground state themselves are not the evidence. They're not. They have been the problem over 4 election cycles. So that forces us to look at more reliable, more accurate, more time-tested, fail-safe predictive variables. And they are all in stark contrast to these polls. It's absolutely true that these women have shifted their gaze more on the economy than abortion, said Democratic pollster Molly Murphy, who works with Mr. Anzalone. I'm Italian. I don't know if it's Anzalone or Anzalone. He could say it both ways. She said abortion is still a concern, but, quote, they think we're in a recession. A majority are feeling financial strain in this economy. Listen to this Democrat. They think we're in a recession. We are in a recession. You can't fool them, Molly. That's the difference. The government is lying to them. You and the media are lying to them. They don't think anything. They know. They know we're in a recession. They knew it in the Registered Voter Economic Confidence Index we conducted in the spring before the Bureau of Economic Analysis came out and said, yup, two full 2 full quarters consecutively of negative GDP growth, which is by definition a recession. They told us that before that report even came out. This is, and I gotta laugh. I listened to Joe Scarborough this morning and these others. Joe Biden on Wednesday is giving a speech about threats to democracy. They just don't get it. They don't get it. And if you want to rely on your crappy New York Times polls and stick your head up your butt or up each other's butt and, pretend that Fetterman's still going to beat Oz by 10 points, knock yourselves out. In 2016, again, I've said this over and over again, but I see it happening again. They didn't learn their lesson that they have real grievances. People have real grievances. They have real reason to make those grievances. You cannot ignore them and then get mad at them for not falling for your distraction. Maybe Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski can afford, they have the privilege to be able to afford to pretend like election denying is new and some big great threat to democracy. But these voters can't. I hate how much these people hate the voter or look down upon the voter, how much they disrespect the voter. Nothing chaps my ass more. In 2016, as Laura, I have no doubt, would tell all of you, like I said, there's no such thing as a nonpartisan election forecaster or pollster. We all are human and we all have our own views. I, of course, have my own views. In the 2015 season for the 2016 Republican nomination, I personally wanted Scott Walker to win. He, in our polling, was the only one who, at the time, before Trump came along, who looked like he could win both Iowa caucuses and the New Hampshire primary, something that always caused a rift with Republicans. The conservative would try to win Iowa, then the moderate would try to win New Hampshire, and then they'd wind up pissing off the other, and it would always take months, if they even were able to consolidate the party again. Meanwhile, Democrats rallied all the time around their candidate, and that's just the way the cookie crumbled, and it wasn't very healthy. I don't like politicians because they have a certain number, or certain letter after their name. I know Scott Walker. I was deeply upset that he hired George Will's wife and let her ruin his campaign, all to fit in with the cool club and attack Donald Trump. But I was polling and I was listening to these voters. And because I was not born with a silver spoon in my mouth, I worked hard for everything that I have. I had a tough going of it. I just pulled up my damn pants and laced up my boots. And fell on hard times here, acted like an idiot there, but always had a good work ethic that, thank God, my father instilled in me. And I worked for everything I have, but it doesn't mean that I forgot that the plant up the road, Suburban, who manufactured storm doors and windows, right, was a place that if you lost your job, you could go and get a shift. They'll give you $12 an hour. It wasn't great work, but it's something you could do to put food on the table for your family if your father lost their job, or maybe illegal immigration came in and took out their HVAC job. It was just cheaper for somebody to go to 7-Eleven and pack the car with a bunch of illegal immigrants and pay them $5-6 an hour to do the job. A master carpenter, like one of my friend's dad, would have needed a lot more money to do, right? Even some of the union problems. That's why back then unions were opposed to illegal immigration, because you would come in, there would be like an electrician's union, you needed a journeyman license or something, and yet they would just go and get a bunch of illegal immigrants at 7-Eleven to install all these light fixtures illegally, but they did it nonetheless because they did it cheap. So as I'm polling, I'm doing what a pollster's supposed to do, and I'm listening. And I'm listening to Trump, and he's talking about these things, and I know that these are real problems people have been concerned with forever, but I'm listening to the voter. And because of my own experience in life, I'm like, you know what? This guy's going to win. He's going to win. Scott Walker is not going to be able to stop him. Nobody is. And a Bernie Sanders voter in Lansing, Michigan. Woman is a liberal, voted Democrat her entire life. Yet I'm polling early head-to-head matchups. And while Fox News is everybody beating Hillary Clinton except for Donald Trump, which was just lunacy, right? I'm really realizing that actually Trump is the only one who has a chance because there's this crossover here. If Bernie doesn't win the primary, I'm voting for Donald Trump. I hate Hillary Clinton. I hate these corporate Democrats. The TPP is now going to go on top of NAFTA. They've hollowed out our entire manufacturing base here in the Midwest. And I'm from the Mid-Atlantic. I was born in New York, but I'm from the Gardens tri-state area, really. And I've seen it. I know what they're talking about. And as a pollster, I'm listening. As Laura will tell you, I was not, open to all this right away. I listened to the voter. These people refuse to listen to the voters. That's my long way around. They refuse to acknowledge that these grievances were real. They are real. They're still real. And they just try to offer these distractions and then piss on your head and tell you it's raining. So how dare those stupid white women, right? Now they're back to basically being stupid, racist white women. And if you think that's not going to happen next week, you better think again. Remember Larry Sabato after Virginia? Oh, I guess white women aren't as smart after all. They're just racist too, I guess. Right on MSNBC. These, again, were the saviors of the Republic in 18 and 20. So white women, you best get ready. Because it's happening. Hispanics, they're going to do it to you too. Young black men, yup. Best prepare for it. Because rather than admit that their governing philosophy has failed huge numbers of people, now even people that have been voting for them, they won't admit that. Instead of admitting it, they will refuse, and they will instead look for people to blame. They will try for more distractions. And if you just don't see how we're in this critical time here, where there's this major threat to democracy, and that threat is MAGA, then you're a racist, or you're dumb. It's coming. It's coming. Meanwhile, I'm telling you, this is why I'm saying that the shifts in demographics themselves, folks, they did not catch this in 14. They caught the tail end of it, and they were like, maybe Republicans can do a little bit better than the polls suggest. Maybe they will. And it just was a freaking blowout. Washington Post. Warner plus 11. 11. It happens. And I'm trying to tell you, it's more likely, what we're seeing here in the shift in the ground, it is far more likely that some of these, not some, most, even potentially me, I'm serious, we may miss it as well. I have a feeling that this is brewing, and it's brewing beneath the surface, and this is all on top of a bunch of people that we know we can't reach. I mean, after the New York Times poll, he wrote an article the next day. Oh, by the way, here's why I could be wrong. Here's why I'm warning you. Even in states where his understatement of Republican support wasn't even that bad, he was saying, and it was worse this year. This many more, these white Democrats were so much more willing to talk to us. Believe me, folks, there is a vote that just cannot be measured anymore. I really believe that. In most of these states anyway. But the likelihood that this is a blowout with numbers like this has grown exponentially. You don't trust Republicans on the top issue by 20 points and vote Democrat. Just like with Republicans in 18. The map looked better for them at the Senate level than it does for Democrats this year. The map is like, well, Rich, Republicans held on for two reasons. One, Trump, period. He ran around, he single-handedly saved the Senate. Loyalty to him saved the Senate. And two, the map was, these were not good states for Democrats. These weren't even states. Understand that the election mafia wants you to believe that Joe Donnelly had a better chance of holding on than Mark Kelly. Joe Donnelly is in a red state. A state that is often double digits more to the right than the nation as a whole. Arizona is 4 points more Republican than the nation as a whole. It's not comparable. Warnock, same deal. Even New Hampshire with Balda, 3 points. It was 7-point Biden. The nation was 4. So it's actually 3 points more. That's it. They're not comparable. And Kavanaugh, that's a good point, Pious Priest. Because I'll tell you, we never had Heidi Heitkamp holding on against Kavanaugh. Against Kramer. But we did have it closer. And then when the Kavanaugh, and actually I think I still got that poll. Well, I got them all. It's just I think I got it handy. The Kavanaugh situation blew Kramer's lead way open. And it receded before Election Day a little bit. We nailed that race. We pulled it 3 times. And the first time it was like Kramer plus 5 or 7, maybe. Then it blew open to like Kramer plus 14 because of Kavanaugh. And then it receded a little bit, but it never receded back to the single digits. It went to like 12 or 11. But that year, Democrats led on the most important issue, even though voters, they trusted Republicans on second and third issues that were really close. Listen, inflation is not close to anything else right now. The economic issues and inflation are far away. Like number 2 and 3 are distant number 2s and 3s. That's not the way it's been in recent midterms, even in 2018. In 2018, it was healthcare, but it wasn't healthcare by a huge margin. The economy was pretty close. Republicans were given a big edge on the economy among voters, as they were with immigration, which was like number 3. Number 1 was healthcare, and Democrats had the edge there. And we saw what happened. This time, Republicans have the edge with 4 out of the 5 top voting issues, and it's a huge edge. It doesn't make what they're trying to sell to you doesn't add up. And it is far more likely that they will be wrong again than it is that I will be wrong. All right, we're going to take a quick break here. I got to go run and grab something for the other room. But when we come back, I am looking at some of your questions and stuff like that. But there's a big thing I want to talk about down in Florida. And I want to go around the map real quick for early voting. All right. To talk about what we think we can actually infer. And what we can infer is that it does appear that the groups that we're seeing these shifts away from Democrats did not show up for them in the early vote like they have been doing. And that what does that tell us? That tells us our polling is right. That the polling at the national level, for the most part, looks right. And believe me, if the Hispanic vote shift was not real, we wouldn't be seeing what we're seeing. If the suburban woman shift was not real, then we wouldn't be seeing what we're seeing. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more. All right, so hang tight. We're going to do a 30-second countdown. Then we'll have to go through some words from our sponsors. Then we come back. We'll do that. All right. You're watching Inside the Numbers. Stay tuned.
Well, what do we have here? And I couldn't find what I was looking for. And by the way, new shirts are in. They look great. So are the new hoodies. Super cozy. Got them for the kids. They were like, woo. And now it's getting a little chilly. The choice is clear. Elect Ted Budd. This has been coming. He's raised enough money. His mailers are working. There's only one choice to stop inflation. Ted Budd. Ted Budd is working to get Washington out of the way and put North Carolina families first. He stood strong against a progressive agenda and unchecked spending that's driving up inflation. Ted Budd will get our economy back on track. Sherry Beasley. A vote for Sherry Beasley could turn our economy and our country upside down. This is a very well-worded flyer. It's actually a well-visual flyer as well. This is a good job of a mailer, okay? Because what is Ted Budd doing? He's focusing on the number one issue, and he's drawing a contrast. And he's speaking to this angst that I keep talking about. Because at this point, we're asking people for the number one issue, and that's fine. And they'll give it. But then they want to tell us a litany of issues that they have right now with the way things are going in the country. Beasley is already pushing to end the filibuster, and that could lead to packing the Supreme Court with activist judges, something nobody supports. The progressive agenda will go unchecked, resulting in more spending and even more inflation. That's smart. It's a smart mailer, Ted Budd. Well done, or whoever put it together for you. Look, some of these mailers are from Democrats and Republicans are just garbage, but that one there did a good job, honestly. All right. Speaking of inflation, speaking of issues with the economy, let's have a word for our sponsors. All right. This is, like I said, the foundation of your preparation. All right. Food shortages, got to learn how to deal with them, got to be prepared for them. Drought, inflation, even new government policies that pushed America's food supply to its breaking point, near its breaking point. And that's why survival food is more important than ever. Do what Laura and I have done for our family and create your own stockpile of the best-selling 4 Patriot survival food kits. This isn't ordinary food. We're talking good for 25 years. Hand-packed right in a family-owned facility in the US of A. These kits are compact, they're sturdy, they're water-resistant, light resistant, and they stack easily. You can put them store them in your closet, keep them out of the way. They really don't take up much room at all. Save them for literally a very rainy day. They have delicious breakfasts, lunches, dinners, and you can make these meals in less than 20 minutes. Just add boiling water, simmer, and serve. Go to 4patriots.com/TPP to get your 3-month survival kit. And by the way, this 3-month survival kit has more variety. You'll get their famous guarantee for an entire year after your order, plus 10 free gifts and free shipping. They're called 4 Patriots because a portion of every sale is donated to charities who support our veterans and their families. Just go to 4patriots.com/TPP, all right, to build your own stockpile like Laura and I have done today. And by the way, if you're browsing their super awesome website, don't forget to use the promo code if you're getting other products, TPP10, that's TPP for the People's Pundit, 10 for 10% off. TPP10 to at checkout, enter that code at checkout to get 10% off your site-wide order today. All right. Nope, another crappy day in the morning. Yep. So you guys are just helping me, really just helping. But help yourself, really, because the last time the economy looked like this, the stock market's tanked 50%. The U.S. dollar lost 46% of its value. Price of oil quadrupled. And yet while the U.S. economy collapsed and inflation ran through the roof, gold 1,300% up. Silver, 2,400% up. So if history repeats itself, we absolutely can see this happen again. And I can't afford to miss what could be the biggest gold and silver boom of our generation, and neither can you. That's why I want you to visit tpplikesgold.com, because when you do, you'll not only get the chance to protect your retirement savings with gold and silver, you could get $10,000 or more in free silver just for doing it. This is a rare opportunity, so don't miss out on it. Best opportunity to protect your retirement savings. Visit tpplikesgold.com. That's tpplikesgold.com and get your free silver and gold kit today. We talked a little bit about Nevada already, right? Which is not good. Let's take a look here, see at this update. And it doesn't look like it has updated yet.
But I will say this. Yesterday, when early voting ended in Florida, and we get updates pretty frequently, and I really should go and run and check it now because I think it's going to hold. As of last night, Republicans had been steadily gaining on Democrats. When it kicked off, Democrats were ahead. Now Republicans are significantly ahead, almost, it'll be close to 200,000 soon. 200,000 ballots statewide. It's getting there. It's headed there. That's statewide, but it can't be done unless we see a continuation of the shift in southern Florida as we saw under Donald Trump. They love Trump in Miami-Dade. Okay, these newly naturalized Venezuelans, Cuban Americans, and even former Democrats that are older and people who have fled New York under Fauci fascism. All right, all of that, making it up to be a very different environment. But the Hispanic vote shift, more pronounced, most pronounced, you can see in the county of Miami-Dade. As of last night, there were only 217 ballots separating the total between absentee ballots mailed, which Republicans used to do more than Democrats. Now they don't. Democrats do it more. Between absentee ballot and early in-person voting, that's flipped. It used to be that Democrats did that more, and Republicans would outvote them in absentee ballots, and Republicans would need to get kind of close because then on election day, they'd win election day, and that's how they would win Florida. This is reversed now. Democrats vote absentee ballot. Republicans do more early voting. All right, they do absentee ballot too, but they were trailing by quite a bit. Anyway, this morning, as I was on War Room checking Miami-Dade, right, and boom, there it is. Republicans take a lead in Miami-Dade total early vote by about 17 ballots. Probably updated now, and it's probably even more. But I have to tell you, this is a huge story. A huge story. All right, so this is it's a major deal. All right, so yeah, this is big because we're going to expect Democrats to win the early vote. We are. That's going to happen. It's just that they haven't been. North Carolina is another one. This is the worst spread for Democratic advantage ever in early voting in North Carolina, ever. In Pennsylvania, we don't have that long of history, to be truthful. We don't. However, there is typically it was a little bit more than 4-1 in 2020. Now it's just under 3.5-1. So again, Democrats have a big advantage. And even in our poll, I mean, Fetterman was taking like 70-something% of people who already voted. And Oz was like less than 20. But that's because only like 12 or 13% of Republicans had voted. The vast majority of Republicans in the 80% and plus, 80s, I'll say, claim to want to vote on election day. That was also the case with 70% of independents. So we are going to see this big election day vote from Republicans compared to what they've done in early voting. We already talked about Nevada. It didn't show up in Nevada. All right. But by the way, what could be that 0.25% difference in Pennsylvania? The white suburban woman. That's it. I mean, the evidence is there. We're all seeing the polling shifts with Hispanics, moving to the GOP. Well, I think it's very clear when you look at Florida, you look at Arizona, you look at Nevada. I think it's very clear that's what's going on there. They did not show up for Democrats to vote the way that Democrats want them to vote. And I think you'll find that a lot of them that did show up in a state like Nevada are probably going to vote for Adam Laxalt and Lombardo. Not huge amounts, but enough. In Arizona, it's over now. It was not huge. Meanwhile, the early vote in Arizona looks like it's it's now moving more back to like 2020. So in 2020, about 20%, little under 20, little over 20, depending on the day, you know, an average, probably about 20%, said they were going to vote on election day. That number grew in the primary, especially the Republican primary. And what happened in 2020? We had historic election day turnout. In 2022, for the Republican primary, we had historic high, the most ever turnout for a primary and a midterm. So what's going on? You know, I mean, do we believe these people? I mean, obviously, I think we do. And it's ticked down now. And just to look, it's like 22, 23% that say they're going to vote on election day in Arizona total, not Republicans, total. And yet still, Arizona just didn't look great at all for Democrats. Here's the latest in Texas. Let's go to Texas. Hold on one second. Waiting for it to load up. All right. Now let me put this back up real quick. In the state of Texas, where we have what is supposedly a competitive race for governor, it is not. And I'll be honest with you. There are some Republicans in Texas who think that some of those races are actually close. Okay? Let me get the governor. Where's the governor? There you are. And their internal polling is showing that their races are kind of close. Their modeling, however, looks completely inaccurate. It does. All right. There's the gubernatorial. Load it up. Pop it up. So let's take the state of Texas. You'll notice I haven't even put it up yet because it's just not priority. I mean, it's going to be likely Republican. All right. And that's what we have. All right. In 2018, 62% of all votes cast early or by mail were cast during the first 7 days of early voting, and early mail accounted for 74% of all the votes cast in the election. Statewide, 2018. If that trend continues the same for this year, then total turnout in Texas would be about 6,439,722, or about 36.4% of all registered voters. In 2018, turnout was 53%, and it was 33.7% in 2014. So what they're talking about is less than 18, more than 2014, something, by the way, along the lines of what CNN was trying to say. I think, honestly, it could be more election day than people think. So it could be like a little bit less than 2018, or even maybe, a little bit more. But you got a lot of ground. It would be a huge election day turnout. If it's more than 2018 turnout and election day, then Republicans are going to friggin' win races they never even thought they were going to win. If there is, by the way, there is a vote of, likely voter. It's kind of, well, I don't want to get into that. Hold on. So in 2018, we're looking at 53%. Currently, right now, if this pattern changed in 2022, we'd be looking at 36.4% in Texas. The top 30 counties, 625,870 fewer votes were cast than in 2018. Top 5 counties, Harris, Dallas, Bexar, Travis, and Tarrant, have cast 40.5% of all votes. In 2018, that was 75%. And by the way, Tarrant County, right? That actually is higher, and that is a Republican county. That's actually one of the few high population zones or high population counties in Texas that is Republican. All right, they are outvoting as a share than the others in early vote. Turnout where Republicans are doing well is more than 50% of the vote, is 17.6%. That's its turnout level at this point. Meanwhile, turnout in Democrat counties is only 15.8. The Republican advantage is 45 to 32 among voters who have no election history. That is currently making up 24% of the total vote. That's a lot. And yet, Republicans have a 13-point edge among those voters. Equal numbers of men and women have voted, 17%. Only 7% of voters 18 to 29 have voted. So When I'm looking right now at my poll in Arizona, and it's telling me that 18 to 29-year-olds are only like 6.5% of the vote right now, that's right. It's right. It's stunningly low, but it's right. In Pennsylvania, we saw roughly the same thing. Younger voters just weren't stoked about voting. The second thing I want to warn people about when it comes to reading the tea leaves in Pennsylvania, if you look at where the early votes have come in the state of Pennsylvania, okay, they have not come disproportionately, even from Democrats in southeastern Pennsylvania. They don't. The turnout, the return percentages are higher in northern, central, and western areas of the state than they are in southeastern Pennsylvania. So what I'm telling you is, if you poll the state of Pennsylvania, the partisan ID is going to be at least R+1, meaning people will identify more, slightly more Republican than Democrat. When you look at the voter file, Pennsylvania is still anywhere between, it's probably still roughly D+6. And actually, we can pull it up right now because I've been trying to get this for you guys. So what I'm saying is, if you're Tiny Boner, for instance, at Target Fart, all right? Tiny Boner from Target Fart. If you're Tiny Boner from Target Fart, you're looking at just partisan ballots. You don't know how they voted, right? But if you look at where they're coming from, you can have some idea about whether or not those voters are cross-party voters. Like if I called them on the phone, would they really be considering themselves Democrat? And they're coming from a very rural parts of the more conservative parts of the T. At least they're in higher percentages, not in higher numbers, but in higher percentages. So while we look in 2020 and we said at a slightly over 4-1 advantage of early votes, now it's like less than 3.5-1. Then obviously, if we're going to look and see, okay, well, where are those votes coming from? Is it really 3-1? And honestly, it doesn't look that way. So polling tends to overstate early vote margins for both sides. That's just true of both sides. It does. If it's a heavily Republican early vote state, it'll tend to overstate how much of an edge Republicans have on actual ballots, right? Not partisan ballots, the vote itself. Then the vote comes in and it's much tighter. If you were looking at a state like Arizona, for instance, it may look like it's 70-30 Democrat, but then the early vote comes in, and what did Biden beat Trump by in the early vote? It was like 6 points, something like that, or eight, something. I'll have to go back and look. But if you polled it, it looked like Biden was beating Trump by 30 points in the early vote. And this is something Robert and I talked about quite a bit. We would caution people about reading the early vote tea leaves. All right, let me bring up this one. We'll go to Pennsylvania. And my point is going to be, look at the actual partisan share of Pennsylvania. All right, let's run the count first. Oh, you can't see it. Sorry. Let's look at the actual. It's running. It's doing its thing. Now, this is registrations. It's not going to be self-ID. So if we call them, we talk to them, and it's a randomized sample, what does the partisan ID shake out to be? Just like in Arizona right now, we know that the partisan ID should be about 37, 32, or 38, 33, and it's not. It's almost 39. It's like 39, 28. Republicans could seriously have a self-ID edge of like 9 to 11 in the exit polls when they come out in Arizona. That absolutely can happen. All right, so parties up here. All right, so let's just run it by party first. Actually, I wanted to look at ideology. We'll do that after. All right, so as you can see here, oof, it's getting close. It's getting real close. This used to be like D+12, 13 during the beginning of the Trump era. It has consolidated quite a bit. Democrats appear, at least appear, to have a 5-point registration edge, almost 6, right? A little less. So about 5.8. It just keeps ticking down. It does. Because what was it, 2020, guys? It was like D+7 still, something like that. If you've been with me for a while, you know. So it keeps ticking down. Yet, if I call these people, only about 40% are going to identify as Democrat. about 42% will identify as Republican. The rest of these will be unknowns or independents, of which there are very, very little. Like the nones are only 12%. When you add up everybody else, we get, between 16 and 18. That's it. There aren't many independents at all in the state of Pennsylvania. Okay. This has been the pattern now for a while. And again, in Arizona, it looks like it's like R+5, but then when you do party ID, it's not. So where are these ballots coming from? All right. Oops, that's not it. Sorry. That was close. Yeah, it would have been a big deal. I'm pulling so much. It would have just been another little bit. But let this load up, do its thing. I know I'm coming up in the hour, but I just want to show you something. Come on. It's because I hit that other one first. You know what? Let's end this and run the count. There we go. It was doing it. There we go. Let's run the count. PA. Come on, come on, come on. Giddy up. It's almost there. This is why it's taking so long to get your voter analysis. It's a huge database, folks. Okay. It's coming. I believe it's this one. Always, yeah, toggle rooftop. It's going to start painting in little dots. Okay. It always goes smaller, so the resolution isn't that bad. But before it does it, and as it goes to do it, all right, these are obviously the most Democrat-friendly areas of the state, right here, until, of course, you get to Pittsburgh and Allegheny County here. Erie County is most definitely a battleground, all right, around here. What you're seeing are ballots that are being returned. Oh, are you kidding me? You just farted out on me like that? What you're seeing is that ballots that are being returned are being returned. Yes. Amen. Because it makes so much more sense when it's up. Thank you. All right. And by the way, the Northeast now is a battleground. You can see Monroe, Luzerne, Lackawanna, where Trump does really good. There, by the way, is a very heavily contested congressional seat that's right in Biden's backyard. The New York Times, that they did those like 4 or 5 district polls right after they had an R+4, by the way. I mean, Biden won this district by 3 points. And they came out with a Democrat by 6 when they actually did the name ballot. Folks, that's freaking lunacy. If it's R+4, that district is gone. Anyway, the ballots that are being returned in a lower percentage here in southeastern Pennsylvania, where you see a lot of blue, a lower percentage here in southwestern Pennsylvania, where you see a lot. Where it starts in western Pennsylvania to start to be higher returns, it's Westmoreland. So they're Democrats from Westmoreland to Cambria, which is pretty good for Democrats still, but through Blair, then it starts to fade out. But then when you get up to northeastern, where Luzerne and Lackawanna are, and then up into the north, Tioga, Bradford, Potter, McKean, Warren, the ballots that are being returned in heavily are Mercer, Crawford, Venango. Why does it matter? Because Trump couldn't get 60, 70% of the vote in some of these counties based on registered Republican voter support alone. These are ancestral Democrats who now have been Trump converted, all right, and have been since 16. So while Democrats are going to lead in the early vote, what I'm saying is the early vote may not be very indicative of the margin, because there are a lot of Democrats, registered Democrats, who might have returned their ballot. But those ballots are definitely for Doug Mastriano or Mehmet Oz. So while they may have a 3.5 to 1 advantage over Republicans, maybe it'll only look like they had a 3 to 1 advantage, because some of those returned Democratic ballots were not pro-Democrat really at all. They're just simply people in Western Pennsylvania who have not changed their voter registration. Believe me, there's still a ton of them, even though we've seen a big net shift to Republicans over the last 6 years in the era of Trump. Let's just say in the era of Trump, we've seen a big shift in Pennsylvania from the Northeast all the way to the Northwest particularly. But definitely this was Gore country, folks. Outside of everything outside of Allegheny, Washington, Beaver, this was Gore country. Kerry did better, than modern Democrats do in this area. George Bush, actually won Berks and Bucks and all those. This is now Democrat country with Allegheny and sometimes Erie. So very, very different than it used to be. And it's still obviously a phenomena that has continued. Obviously. Because if it wasn't, we would be getting self-identified D+5s, D+4s, D+6s, right around D+7s, whatever. Right, especially considering the response bias that favors Democrats. Right around the neighborhood of the voter file. But instead, we're not. What we're getting is R+1, R+2, and maybe even, look, I saw one poll where Democrats were so under, stated. I mean, we know they're registered Democrats, but self-ID in this pollster, it was a D+5 registered voter sample as far as what you're registered as, and yet it came back R+5. So, interesting to note. As far as self-identification, it came back. The people that he talked to that were interviewed, and we know that registered wise was D+5, yet it came back stated R+5. So it's still happening. So again, a lot of pitfalls trying to read early vote tea leaves. A lot of pitfalls. And the general consensus is this is not good early voting. And even, look, Wasserman yesterday was like, listen, if you're stretching to look at early vote patterns and, to find good news for Democrats, then you're really off base because there is none. And if you're doing that to try to cope with the polling not going your way, you're going to be very unhappy on election day. And that is true. It is. One thing I could say I agree with them on. And so without a doubt, therein lies and concludes the show. Check me out on Charlie Kirk. I'll be on Charlie Kirk in a little bit. Then I'm going to get my butt back to polling. All right. Now that I have this up, though, I'm going to leave it up so I can get you this voter analysis out. Okay. I did want to show you ideology because it is so much different. You'd be surprised. I mean, Pennsylvania is like less conservative than some of the other battleground stuff, of course, but it's still, more conservative than you would think, considering that few number of conservative profiled 42%. Exit polls constantly say like 36. Maybe that's why they're wrong. All right. And again, though, they also overstate moderates, whereas it's showing us here that liberals are in the 30s, and typically they're not self-identified. I think we were at 23 liberal in the Pennsylvania poll that we did. That's all. And I was being generous. I actually thought that would probably more reasonable to say 21 or 22. And ideology obviously has a great deal of impact, but there you have it. All right. As always, that concludes another version of Inside the Numbers. Don't miss it on Friday. All right, noon Eastern Standard Time, and stuff will be coming pretty fast and pretty furious. So keep an eye out. As always, folks, thanks for watching. Love you for it, and we'll see you on Friday.
How much you wanna bet that I can get you back inside your head before the summer ends and spread a little love. Just for a little fun, I'll make you come back to me before the rise of every sun. Baby, it's meant to be, I know you got a man, but you don't understand. You're gonna be a heartbreaker. You're such a love taker. So just suck me in and you can toss me like a cigarette.